we're going to open this one a little differently. This episode will feature graphic discussions about the Jack the Ripper murders. There will be no swearing, but the real-life events that inspired this comic and movie will be discussed. So consider this your content warning, because on this Halloween episode of Moving Panels, we discuss From Hell. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me in the co-host chair are two co-hosts today for this Halloween episode. First off, the host of Interview with a Horror Virgin. I think he has avoided his lobotomy for the day. Please welcome James Brooks.
Hey, everybody. I'm excited.
And as always, we want to welcome our dapper Southern gent. Some people might call him Boss. Please welcome Blake Fowler.
Laramy, no tie today after watching this movie. I was feeling a little tight around the collar, so I didn't want to risk it.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I should wear one to protect my neck after, or throat, or whatever part.
That's where I thought. Where I thought you were headed.
No, I like to live life on the edge, Laramy, and just risk it all.
Beautiful.
All right, so for those of you who heard the opening, I'm gonna go ahead. We're gonna try to keep this light, but I do want to say again that this episode might get graphic because of the content that we're talking about. And to kind of give you an example here, and I'll let Blake tell his story that he was talking about earlier before we recorded. So as I read this comic, first off, I could not read it all in one sitting. There were parts that were absolutely uncomfortable to read. But also, I learned that this is not a comic you can read in public.
Oh, man.
Did you learn that lesson the hard way, Laramy?
No, I didn't. Luckily, I didn't learn it the hard way.
Just realized it. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm sitting there reading it, and this is very early on in the comic. Sitting there reading it while my daughter is in karate, and I flip to a panel. And then I'm going, if somebody walks behind me right now, this could be very awkward.
Hold on. I think you need to explain how you read your comics. Because of the way you read it, you're surprised by one panel to the next, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I read this one on the Kindle.
Yeah.
And the Kindle showed, now the Kindle showed 2 panels at a time. Because Alan Moore had this thing about 9 panels. Yeah. And this one showed 2 at a time. And so this isn't, 9 panels. Maybe you can tell what's in the... No, this is, here's the picture. You can tell what's happening.
Much like Jack the Ripper, Laramy now knows all about human anatomy. So good for you, Laramy.
And you couldn't really close it quick,
Look, I am telling you, Eddie Campbell is very detailed with the human body.
I'm just like picturing Laramy just like swiping, bam. He's like, trying to fumble and like turn the Kindle. Look, it's not what it looks like.
Yeah.
What are you reading there, Mr. Wells?
There's some nudity they didn't even show in Game of Thrones. In this
one. For real.
Yeah.
I would make a joke here, but I can't do it.
So let me go ahead and...
Yeah, cheeks already hurting. Okay.
Let me go ahead and send this over to Blake. So, Blake, what is your history with... Let's start with just the comic. Yeah. What is your history with the comic?
Yeah, so to backstory just a tad, I grew up in a very, very strictly religious household. Very devout household, and there were a lot of rules and regulations as to what you were supposed to watch and what you're supposed to read and what you're supposed to talk about. And so my introduction to From Hell, I was in high school, and a buddy of mine had the comic. And for those of you who don't know, it is a massive piece of literature, gargantuan even. And so it
is. I've got it right here.
Yeah.
It is 565 pages, or at least the version I read.
Yeah, so
565 pages.
Roundabout, not the non-omnibus version. Yeah, it's five. Of course, yes. Alan Moore probably has it at 900 somewhere in his basement. But a friend loaned it to me. He knew I was big into comics. He knew I was into Batman. And at the time, I was more than a little into Jack the Ripper. Not weirdly into Jack the Ripper, but just enough to be interested. And so he loaned me the comic, and over the course of a couple of weeks, I did the literal reading it under the sheets at night with a flashlight after everyone went to bed, because I knew I wasn't supposed to have it and I wasn't supposed to be reading it. And as Laramy's already stated, it was, I don't know how to put this tactfully, I learned a lot. It was a learning experience for me, even at that age, but was just obsessed with it. It's a fantastic read if you can stomach some of the things that are said and some of the things you see. But that was really my first and only read of it, because it is such a lengthy piece of work. But yeah, just was super excited when the movie came out because I remembered the comic. But we'll get to that, I guess, in a minute.
Yeah. So to put this in perspective again, so this, like I said, the version I had, which does have a huge appendix at the end of where Alan Moore is kind of giving details about his research and all that. But it was 565 pages. To put that in perspective, Watchmen was only, and I say only because comparatively, 448 pages.
It's a swift read right there. It's quick.
And then V for Vendetta, his other one around this, was 296 pages.
Basically a pamphlet.
Yeah, this is the longest comic book I have ever read. So now, James, you have not read the comic.
No, I decided to, since you told me Blake has actually read it and has more knowledge behind it, I kind of went like the scholar boring route. I went like, do like, documentary stuff, research papers on like, everything from the victims to just the speculations on who the killer was, all that. But I can only imagine how much is in there that makes you just kind of be like, oh, time to put this down for a little bit.
It is. It definitely is.
I need a shower.
Now I will say early in the comic, it's putting it down because I'm tired of reading. That's what.
There's a lot of setup. A lot of.
I swear. I feel for Eddie Campbell, the illustrator, because it feels like sometimes Alan Moore tried to fit like 150 words into a single panel. Yeah. Okay, well, so James, you are more of the horror movie guy. So what is your history with the movie?
Well, with the movie, I just kind of briefly looked it over and all that. But I will say, as someone who's like a big fan of like Hammer films and like Mario Bava, I love a good gothic story. I love like a good like Victorian dark gothic story. I love these type of tales. It's very like sick and depraved, but it's even like when you like watch Sweeney Todd or something, you're just like, oh boy, let me see how he's gonna kill them next.
Now, how about you, Blake? What was your history with the movie?
Again, this is one of those things where when the movie came out, I had to sneak to try and watch it. I was very excited to watch Sleepy Hollow 2, Ichabod Crane Goes to London.
Oh no.
And no. It's the same movie. First of all, let's just we'll get that out of the way.
There are a lot of
just real quick. It's the same movie. No, I watched it and I remember watching it and thinking, man, this is like some cool visual cinematography stuff going on. A lot of symbolism. I remember this scene where the grape beats like a heart in one of the scenes, and just some cool stuff they did. Upon a rewatch recently, it is super early 2000s. Like it is not holding up to the test of time, but it's still an enjoyable watch. So that's kind of my history with the movie.
Yeah. So same thing for me. I saw it, probably rented it, I would say.
Yeah, I can't remember if I rented it on VHS or DVD at that point in time. We had an old school video store where I grew up, and I had to sneak in and like walk it out with like Homeward Bound 2. Try and get it out of there without anybody seeing that I was taking From Hell, because everybody knows everybody in my hometown. But I want to say it was on VHS. I can't remember specifically, but
it could have been. I mean, this was
VHS.
The movie was released October 19th of 2001.
Yeah.
So this is right at the transition.
Sure.
So
There also was a 1959 one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's on
Look
Tubi.
at that.
just a Jack the Ripper story. Obviously, it can't be based off of the comic because the comic didn't come out.
Well, no, but I think this was like during, again, as I was saying, right before Hammer was beginning to be popular. So that whole transition from, the Universal monsters to, retelling of everything in color with gothic architectures and just dark, misty alleyways.
Sweet. Tubi?
Yeah, it's on Tubi.
Yeah, okay. Check that out.
Again, I've got the host of a horror movie podcast, and I've got my guest host who is just in love with the macabre.
Yeah.
So
what two better people?
Yeah.
I know, right?
I know. It was perfect duo here. All right, so let's talk about the comic. So the comic was first released at the beginning of 1989. It was released issue by or chapter by chapter. It was originally
so for 6 years they put this out.
Yes, that's the thing. It was until it was 95.
Oh god,
it took until 95.
That was legit.
I think that was right. Hold up, I didn't actually write that down, but I did read it. I remember reading it.
So Alan Moore playing the long game, man.
He really did, and no, 98.
98. Okay, God.
98. God. So yeah, 9 years. Then it was finally put all together in 99. But yeah, so he actually, the whole idea behind writing this was that it was for the 100th quote unquote anniversary of these murders.
100th anniversary can't last for 9 years.
I mean,
well, yeah.
What better way to honor
1988 would have been the 100 year.
Oh, so he didn't even start writing it during the 100-year anniversary.
Well, no,
he didn't put it. He probably started writing.
He had to have started.
He didn't put it out.
Again, the thing's 600 pages. Yeah. He had to have started.
He didn't put it out.
Okay, I see what you're talking about. Yeah,
but my thing is that with releasing it story by story, chapter by chapter, if you're in, I forgot, I have so many notes and there's some things that are probably buried in here. The magazine that the original chapters were released in, because it wasn't an individual comic, it was like inside of another magazine.
Oh, okay.
That first chapter, you're reading that first chapter, and it's just these two old dudes walking on a beach talking about something. You don't know what they're talking about right off the bat. You don't know who they are. And then it just ends. How does that grab you to then continue on for the rest of this?
Yeah, I don't know that I would have continued reading it had I gotten it issue by issue. Because I know where it went, I kept reading it, but I certainly, the quote unquote issue number 1 there is not one that makes you want to continue down the path of.
Well, but even chapter 5, which is where Gull takes Nedley around London, showing him the architecture, and it's just a history lesson of Freemason buildings. And
that's not what you signed up for, Laramy, in this?
No.
Oh.
That's the entire chapter. It's just this really long history lesson. But anywho, so as we've already said, this was written by Alan Moore, who not only is famous for writing Watchmen, V for Vendetta, but I got Blake on here. You got to mention he also wrote The Killing Joke.
Killing Joke, Swamp Thing.
Even though he absolutely hates The Killing Joke.
He is not a fan, Laramy. We're trying to talk about it in my circle. Just because we, as in me, loves The Killing Joke so much. But yeah,
Alan Moore does not.
Yeah, it's like his
That's so
quote
crazy.
unquote worst work. He said he just does
really?
not
He
like
says
it.
it's he has said it's the worst thing he's ever done.
Is it the art style or just like the way he's telling the story? I don't know.
No, I mean, it would be the story.
Yeah, it's just a story. He says he doesn't like the story, and I'm like, dude, you wrote it. You could have fixed that. But
yeah,
I
will say I don't like the way Batgirl is treated in that story.
That is fair.
Look, but she's treated better in the graphic novel than she is in the animated film. Okay, let's put it like that.
That is true.
Okay.
What animated film?
Don't watch it.
They did The Killing Joke.
Don't watch it.
Well, that's another episode.
I digress.
Of course, he also wrote Saga of the Swamp Thing.
Yep.
If you want to be completely traumatized by Swamp Thing.
So good.
Saga of the Swamp
Thing. I want that now. I want to get this and then Saga of Swamp Thing as well. I want to cry.
So good.
I do actually want to own the physical box set of Saga of the Swamp Thing. I do. That is
There's
something.
A box set?
Yeah, That is because he wrote that much.
It's massive.
Yeah.
It is a legit
like this
saga.
This was a series. So
Bye-bye, paycheck.
Yeah.
This comic was illustrated by Eddie Campbell. Eddie Campbell, I couldn't find an awful lot else that he did. Of course, I've also noticed that Alan Moore tends to work with an illustrator once.
I wonder why. I wonder why that is.
Yeah. But this, of course, is entirely in black and white, which is funny because I don't know if you're aware of this, Blake, but Eddie Campbell has actually re-released it and he colorized the.
Oh, no way! How did? First of all, he would the MPAA, if it was a film, wouldn't let him get away with that if he released it in color. But yeah, no, I did not. I was not aware.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say this needs to be in black and white.
Yeah,
one of those type of comics.
I'm trying to picture it in color, and it's just red. It's a lot of red.
Yeah, there's just a lot that needs to be.
That kind of reminds me of The Crow. Like if you actually read the original like Crow graphic novel or comic, it's in black and white, but it's still just as graphic.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just some comics that need to be in black and white. Scott Pilgrim needs to be in black and white because there are literally jokes in Scott Pilgrim that make reference to the fact that the comic is in black and white. But you can go back and listen to our Scott Pilgrim episode. So
nice plug.
Let's move on.
That's a good episode. I like that one.
So the title From Hell comes from one of the letters that the authorities received that are allegedly from Jack the Ripper. I will say, based off of my research, and James or even Blake, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the From Hell letter is the one that people think of all the letters is probably from the actual killer. Am I correct in saying that?
From what I've read, it's the one that's most likely. There's still no definitive, but it's the most likely.
Since we don't know who Jack is, there's no way to know for sure.
Right.
But this is the one that Ripperologists, and yes, I've discovered that is what they are actually called.
I didn't know that.
I did not know that. Oh, yikes.
Yes. Ripperologists.
Can't we just be Ripper fanatics? Or Ripperettes, even? I'll take that.
Nope. So, again, this is the From Hell letter. This letter was... I've never quite understood this. This letter was not sent to the police. This letter was sent to a man named George Lusk, who was the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a.k.a. the Neighborhood Watch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was sent to him in October of 1888, and it was accompanied with half of a human liver.
Yep.
And a nice bottle of Chianti.
Yeah. So, by the way, I wanted to point this out since neither one of you seemed to know that they were called Ripperologists. The official website is Jack the Ripper, and now there is a hyphen in between, so Jack-the-Ripper .org.
For Oregon.
That's
well, just the fact that it's also reserved. It's an organization.
Yeah, it is.
Like, I mean, but yeah. So anybody who's interested, jacktheripper.org.
Let's get organized. Yeah, don't forget the hyphens.
So anyway, so let's get back to the letter. I actually do want to read the letter. I am going to read it correctly because there are a lot of spelling errors in this. So this is how it read. From Hell. Mr. Lusk. Sore. I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. The other piece I fried and ate it was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch Me When You Can, Mr. Lusk. I ask either of you, based off of this movie, do you think that could have been written by a doctor?
Yeah, so that was my first thing. It was like the movie, if you haven't seen it, makes this claim that a quote-unquote educated man is behind the killings. The letter that we think is most likely from Jack the Ripper is not that of an educated man. Even for that time period, is not the letter of an educated man. Although I'm kind of with James. I think we said this before we started recording, actually. Super Zodiac vibes on that letter. Like, just real big Zodiac killer vibes on the From Hell letter.
Big time, because and I'll go back and forth between this and the Zodiac, because the letters are always taunting. They really are. But again, as I was reading a few of them, I was like, was this somebody like having a translation error or whatever? Because like, it was almost painful to read sometimes, because I wanted to correct it myself just so I could like get through it. But I have to agree, these were not written by someone who was very educated or even literate at that point.
So again, I didn't correct myself on some of the grammar, I should say, because he does say from one women,
right? And
then preserved is actually spelled as if it's preserved.
Yeah.
Prasarved.
Really butchered the spelling there, guys. Yeah.
And then Mr. Lusk at the very end is Mishter. 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 And then there's others. So the movie shows a bunch of letters. You have Johnny Depp looking through a bunch of the letters. The Dear Boss letter. I think one of them actually is supposed to be the Dear Boss letter, which is the one that, according to the comic, based off of Alan Moore's research and the conspiracy theories he followed, the Dear Boss letter was written by journalists who were just trying to get
drum up some kind of interest, drama,
and then they came up with the name Jack the Ripper. Again, only 3. There have been a lot of letters, but it's really only 3. There's the Dear Boss letter. I don't know if the other one has a name, and then of course this one's the From Hell letter. There are the 3 that are typically known, but again, Ripperologists believe that this one was actually written by Jack. Let's move on. So, as you heard me say, Alan Moore did his research, but the bulk of his research came from a theory that was posed by Stephen Knight in a book titled Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution. Mr. Knight, you need a better title.
Tough title. Oh, man. Okay.
Like, come on, get more creative.
There's a group of people that have already kind of laid claim to that title, and it's not a good group. So we should probably.
And can we also point out that group of people is?
Absolutely. It gets brought up on several different occasions in the movie, but the Final Solution. I'm not going to put my trademark or my endorsement behind that title.
All right. So, and I'm going to go a little bit further in that. Like I said, content warning.
Yeah.
So, the beginning of chapter 6, we have 2 random German people making love. It seems completely random.
So tactful.
And there's no translation to anything they say. You have to know German to read it.
Oh, this will be fun for
me. It is maybe 2 or 3 pages, and it's never referenced again. I did not know this reading it. I found out later when I was doing a little bit of research. Blake, you're laughing.
I'm just going to let you.
Do you know what you were witnessing in those 2 pages?
I don't. Again, you have to remember, I'm trying to read through this as quick as I can at night with a flashlight. So I'm just waiting on whatever's
Oh my God. I'm kind of curious now.
You are witnessing Adolf Hitler being conceived.
Yo, what? Okay.
That is what those 2 random pages are.
Hold on. I have questions, and they are important. The first of which is, how did you go about finding out this information?
Again, it was through all the reasons, finding out.
Did you translate from German the writing specific, like just typing it in?
Some of it.
And then your FBI agent that tracks your computer showed up at your door. Like, why are you researching the conception of Hitler?
No. And then it was the date and time. It was because it gives the date and the location. It gives the date and the location.
Right.
in the comic, and again through the appendix that Moore provides himself at the end of the book, and through some other media, I was like, oh my goodness. So yeah, there you go.
Okay. If anyone was ever curious what that event looked like,
you shouldn't be.
so I'm saying if you were, that's up to you.
God. I'm going to restrain myself so badly. I have to.
Don't Google.
So many
don't Google
jokes
Don't Google the panels, James. Don't do it.
It's not that. I was like make a joke at at the end of their
we don't make jokes about this topic.
No, I'm not going to. That's why I'm going to stop myself very quickly. I'm going to resist the voices.
Oh,
all right. So
are they in the room with you now, James?
Yes, they are.
So Stephen Knight's book came out in 1976. So a good 10 plus years before Alan Moore sat down to write this comic. So this is the theory that he gave in his book that Alan Moore hit the ground running with. So the murders, the Jack the Ripper murders, were actually a conspiracy that were executed by a surgeon named Dr. William Gull, real life person, we'll get into that later, who was sent to quote unquote prevent any word from spreading that Prince Albert Victor, who was the Duke of Clarence, had fathered an illegitimate child with a store clerk, a commoner, if you will. That is the basic idea behind what it. I will say Alan Moore said, I'm going to take that, and that's going to be the main premise of my book. Yeah. But I'm also going to take a little bit of this theory, a little bit of that theory, a little bit of this theory, and it makes it a hodgepodge of stuff in this comic. I will say that the William Gull theory has been widely disproven over the years, and after you read this comic or even watch this movie, you kind of, at least I do, question how would anybody believe this to begin with?
Yeah, even in the fictional world of the movie, I would think that'd be tough to wrap your brain around. You have to set a lot of realistic things aside in order to ascribe to the theory that William Gull had anything to do with these killings. Yeah.
I will say, and I'm kind of curious, both Blake and James, what your thoughts are. I will say I kind of like the theory that Jack the Ripper was H.H. Holmes.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I don't know that too many people ascribe to that theory, but I like the theory. I think it's an awesome theory. Yeah. If you don't know who H.H. Holmes is, quote unquote, the first serial killer that we know of or one of, had like this death house in Chicago, I think it was. All these trap doors and things that he would use for murder. But anyway,
secret rooms.
Yeah, secret rooms. Like, it was wild stuff. Very interesting to read about. But yeah, it would be awesome if he was Jack the Ripper. But I don't. Sorry, it's just one of those things, kind of like Bigfoot. I just can't really buy.
Is there a theory though you kind of go behind? Everything's theory. Yeah, I think never know the truth.
Everything is theory. I think it was. Personally, again, we're gonna open up the theories of this Ripperologist and say that it was just it was random. You got these random murders, and then this person up and moves to the quote unquote new world, and that's why he's never found. There's no, at that point in time, obviously no DNA, fingerprinting, that kind of thing. And you get some good guy who goes on a murder spree for no reason and then bounces out of the country. I think sometimes the simplest answers are the most logical, and that's what I can come up with.
I kind of have to go with that as well, because now I'm starting to like delve into the whole, maybe it wasn't just, it was H.H. Holmes as well, but then, maybe it was part of the Black Dahlia as well, going into that.
Yep, read that. Yep.
Because it kind of fits, I know we're saying it was random and all that stuff, but I feel like after like some of the research that I've done, that there was, I have to agree with the ripologists. I'm going to call them that now because I know what to call them until you said that. From what they said, like the canon killings, which very, very gruesome to think about, and then just seeing our theory with H.H. Holmes, and then just kind of like, I don't know, I'm starting to think of a pattern now, and I'm about to go down a rabbit hole of like, it was only women, only pretty women, only dark-haired women,
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more as we go through the episode. I am just going to say, if you can't tell already, anybody listening, we're probably going to talk more about the comic and the real story than we are going to talk about this movie.
And for good reason, if you haven't seen the movie.
And that's because they're more interesting than the movie.
Yeah.
But real quick, the movie, I think I said this already, was released October 19th of 2001. It was directed by the Hughes brothers. That's how they're credited. It's Albert and Alan Hughes, who... This is one of their movies, but to give a little bit more credit to them, these are the directors behind Menace to Society, Dead Presidents, and The Book of Eli. So they can make
a great track record. And again, this is not awful. It just doesn't hold up to the test of time.
Early 2000s.
I'm gonna say.
Right, yeah. If you're watching it in the 2000s,
definitely in early 2000s.
Yeah, if you're watching it when it came out, you were like, "Yeah, whoa, this is great stuff." But yeah.
But to maybe tip my hand a little bit on my final decision, I will say my memory of it, because I probably have not watched it since 01 or 02. Mm-hmm. My memory of this film was worse than my actual experience rewatching.
Nice.
I thought it was better. Not saying it's good, but I thought it was better than I remember.
Always a pleasant surprise when that happens.
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the characters, and this is probably going to take a good while. Hang on, this will probably be a long episode. So here we go. Not that there's a lot of characters. There's just going to be a lot
There's a lot to say.
All right, so we're going to start off right off the bat. Let's talk about Sir William Gull, Dr. William Gull, played by Ian Holm, who Blake has already mentioned is Bilbo Baggins.
Yep. So waiting on him to pull that ring out at any minute and just disappear.
And Ash from Alien.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
You're correct.
You are correct. So anyway, Bilbo Baggins is... So William Gull, as I stated earlier, a real person. He was appointed as one of the physicians in ordinary to Queen Victoria. Again, he wasn't the only one, which the movie and the book kind of...
Yeah, it makes it seem
I will say in the movie, he does say, I'm one of many. I think he says something along those lines. But let's first talk about the biggest thing, in my opinion, that says there's no way he was Jack the Ripper. He was 71 years old in 1888. And this is following in 1887, he had a stroke.
I think he calls it a brain seizure in the movie, right?
Yeah, he says something in the movie.
It's a brain seizure. I don't know how that's happening. There aren't many 71-year-olds that could carry this kind of stuff out. Certainly not someone who was, if you do your research, of his physical stature and limitations.
Yeah, I'd have to agree as well. You don't really see 70-year-old killers out there because the math doesn't add up to the victims as well.
Just in the Expendables, that's it.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, that's my biggest strike against William Gull being. I mean, there's the stuff he writes, the chalk thing about the Jews, the letters, even the one, the From Hell letter. None of that sounds like it's written by even a guy who's trying to fake being not smart. Right. Which, the way they portray Gull in both the comic and the movie, he's full of himself. So he wouldn't even attempt to...
Yeah, he would be as stand-outish as possible in his crime. And you have to... Maybe you'll remember from the comic, because I certainly don't. In the movie... His eyes change for almost no apparent reason.
I have that further in my notes.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. My bad.
No, you're good. You're good. We can talk about it now.
I was like, why? What is the plot purpose other than to say he's quote-unquote evil because his eyes go black? Yeah. But you already know he's evil because he is literally ripping the uterine out of women. So we don't need the eye color change to signify that. Sorry.
I don't know if it was supposed to show that he was kind of possessed a little.
Yeah, is that what I thought maybe that was the reference. We've got like a Haunting in Venice situation
going on. It's not in the comic.
Okay.
They do in the comic after he dies or as he dies. It's very confusing in the comic. They do this thing where like his spirit goes around throughout time. I think I remember that. Yeah. And they actually connect him to other killers throughout time. But yeah, even the whole death. So in real life, William Gull died from 2 days after he suffered a stroke in 1890. Like, it doesn't happen the way. So in the comic book, he gets put into an insane asylum. He's gone insane. In the movie, he's lobotomized and put into the insane asylum. But in real life, he had a stroke, and that's what killed him.
Not as good for screen, Laramy, obviously.
Yeah. No. So let's talk about him in the movie. Do you not get Hannibal Lecter vibes off of him in this movie,
100%.
James?
Yeah, I did too. A little bit of Hannibal Lecter and just, I don't know. Very just, I don't know. The moment I saw him, I just automatically went, he's going to try to be that Anthony Hopkins type, or just like that madman type person where he's going to feel like he's so collected at himself and he knows that he can get away with it, even though we're like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So again, we'll probably talk a little bit more about it as we go. We'll get into all of that. All right, let's move on to. Let me ask you, Blake. Because I heard it pronounced Aberline more, but when I read it before I started doing research and hearing it, I was saying it in my head, Aberline.
I was saying Aberline as well, but it's clearly in the movie Aberline.
Yeah, and even when I was listening to like some other podcast and watching some videos about Jack the Ripper and all that, I was hearing Aberline. So
I don't know.
It may be.
I don't know if I've just watched enough old English Victorian era movies that Aberline is what stuck out to me. But yeah, either way.
Yeah. But let's talk about something that's even weirder. So, in the real world, this man was named Frederick Aberline. In the comic book, his name's Frederick Aberline. In the movie, his name's Frank.
Yep.
Why did they change his name?
Hey, it's a good, strong name. Frederick. Nobody respects a Frederick, right? Sorry, all the Fredericks out there.
But they call him Fred. Yeah.
Laziness, maybe.
Not sure what purpose it serves.
Frank is better.
No,
Frank is better.
Yeah. No. Frank the Tank, the inspector there.
Maybe it was just a complete goof, but they had already started filming, and they were like, crap.
It's our
name's Frank now.
See, I thought we were going to talk about the other really weird thing, Johnny Depp's facial hair in this movie, but you went a different direction in me. Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, played by Johnny Depp, which makes absolutely no sense if you have read the comic or even have looked at a picture of Aberline in real life. Why you would cast Johnny Depp? No sense. In fact, Robbie Coltrane would be a better fit for Aberline. The real Aberline actually began his career as a clockmaker, and I want to go through his career really fast just to show how he was super cop. So he joined the police in 1863, promoted to sergeant in 1865, promoted to inspector in 1873. That was when he was transferred to Whitechapel. He was appointed local inspector in charge in 1878, transferred to Scotland Yard in 1887, promoted to inspector first class in 1888. This was 6 months before the murders.
Impressive.
He was 45 at the time. He was promoted to chief inspector 2 years after the murders in 1890. He retired in 1892. He worked for a private detective agency in 1904. And then he died in 1929. So if you've only seen the movie, yes, he did not die of a drug overdose. He died in 1929 at the ripe old age of 86.
It's a long life for that particular era.
I thought it'd been interesting if he passed away like in his 90s, almost like in his 80s, like 88 or something, because that's when the victims passed away, like 1888. When I was reading that, I was about to say that'd been really creepy if that happened.
Yeah, if he'd have waited.
Just
held on a little longer.
Yeah, and as the comic book displays, but the movie does not, his final case was the Cleveland Street scandal. And this is where Aberline came to believe that there was a conspiracy.
A cabal.
Not necessarily about the Jack the Ripper murders, but about the Cleveland Street scandal. He believed that there were cover-ups from some of his superiors because there was a possible connection to Queen Victoria's grandson. And so that also fueled some of the speculation that went back into the Jack the Ripper movie, or not movies, but murders. And so, again, to give you some idea of where this theory came from. He never believed it was Gull. According to everything I read, the real-life Aberline, his main suspect was a man named George Chapman. However, Aberline also theorized that he felt it could have been a woman.
I liked that one.
Yeah. Easy to get to the victims. They would have trusted her.
Exactly.
Theoretically. Yeah.
Cut out the competition, no pun intended.
There. God, yikes. Yes, absolutely, James.
I mean,
not wrong. This was their means of survival. This was their quote-unquote job.
and also I remember just doing
women.
a brief synopsis of the comic. I don't want to get too deep into like off the record, but it did go into like how people viewed the slums and how authorities viewed the slums differently after this whole event. So, yeah.
Which Whitechapel now is like a tourist trap. You know, you look up what Whitechapel looks like now, and I mean, there's Starbucks on every corner.
Okay.
There's people taking Jack the Ripper tours. Kind of reminds me of my hometown,
Yes,
where people are taking Vampire Diary tours.
I would be one of those people, but that's neither here nor there. I do want to defend Johnny Depp for just a minute, who initially turned down this role because he had just done Sleepy Hollow, and he said it was too close to Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah.
When they went after a litany of A-listers for this role, including Brad Pitt, Laramy. So if you can imagine Brad Pitt playing Aberline.
I cannot.
Yeah.
Because again, if you know what this guy actually looks like and what the character in the comic looks like, no.
But yeah, they ended up. Johnny Depp ended up coming.
But
wicked chops, right? Just
yeah. But I will tell Johnny Depp the same thing I tell some of my students sometimes. Usually, your first instinct is correct. Because let's compare the movie versus the comic / real life. Because again, the guy in the comic and the guy in real life very close.
Right.
Let's compare the movie. So first off is the age. Again, the comic seems to be closer to real life. You know, you heard me say he was 45 at the time. Johnny Depp's version is definitely not 45.
Yeah, not 45, no.
The techniques. So in the comic, Aberline thinks that stuff like dusting for fingerprints and using dogs to track something, he thought those were ridiculous and silly and stupid. But in the movie, he's the one wanting to do it.
Also using his psychic visions.
Yeah, that's my next point. The being clairvoyant. So I will say what I think they were trying to do in the movie is they were trying to combine his character with Robert James Lee.
In the comic, yeah. Because they're two separate people.
Well, and in real life.
Okay,
in real life. Yeah.
Yeah, they're two separate people in the comic and, again, in real life, too, I suppose, then.
Yeah. So in the comic, there is this this quote-unquote psychic. He confesses to being a fake in the comic. I don't want to get into this too much because it has nothing to do with the movie. But he just doesn't like William Gull. And so he makes the police think, hey, I'm having this psychic vision. I think the killer, Jack the Ripper, is Dr. Gull. And he just happens to be right. And that's how it's played out in the comic. In real life, Robert James Lee, again, a real medium of the, quote unquote.
I was like, hold on, wait a minute.
Medium.
Let's throw him up there.
Quote unquote real medium.
Throw him up there.
There is no proof, though, that Robert James Lee was ever associated with the Queen, which the comic book implies, that Queen Elizabeth got his counsel. But the whole leading to the police, leading Jack the Ripper, or the police to Jack the Ripper, that is also, just like a lot of the theories in this movie and comic, have been proven to not be true. There's no record of Lee's ever working with the police on the Jack the Ripper case. So
it's unfortunate for him.
So there you go. And then finally, there's no drug addiction. Aberline does not have a drug addiction in the comic.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask.
No reference to him having a drug addiction in real life. So I don't know what their thought was, other than that's the way they were going to kill him at the end of the movie.
Yeah,
What the thought was of having him have an opiate.
I couldn't remember if he had an addiction in the comic book, so thank you for bringing that up.
Not.
I was trying to, again, give the benefit of the doubt here and think the reason they had him with an opium addiction was to kind of facilitate these visions that he was having, like to make them more powerful or potent. So, that's the only thing I'd come up with as to why they would have him have an opium addiction.
My thing would be have to, like, what they do with, like, all these, like, gritty, like, crime mysteries where the guy has to have some kind of grittiness to them. And
It's got to have some kind of,
alcohol was too overdone, maybe, and I thought, let's give him, some hardcore drugs instead.
Let's just give him opium.
It's bad. Again, we don't want to dwell on anything too much, so let's move on. So your next main character of the movie would be Mary Kelly or Marie Kelly, and if you read the comic book, that gets so confusing.
Yes,
I
do remember
as to
that.
what her first name actually is. Played here by Heather Graham, right at the kind of the peak of her stardom. We cannot talk about Mary Kelly without talking about this murder. So let me throw up the graphic content warning again. So Mary Kelly, who is believed to be Jack's final victim. Again, there is a canonical 5.
Yep.
Some people say 6, but
for sure.
This movie even kind of throws out the one that people think is the 6. But there's the canonical 5, and she is believed to be Jack's final victim. She is the most graphic, the most violent death. I say graphic because of the comic, but in real life, she was the most violent. They believe this is because Jack had more time with her because he was in a room, not just in an alleyway or a backyard. He was in a private room, and there was no chance of him being seen or being caught, so he could do whatever he wanted for as long as it took him. And I'm not going to tell any of you to do this. If you look up Mary Kelly on Wikipedia, you'll find it. But there is a picture, an actual photo of Mary Kelly lying in the bed. And it is a hard picture to look at.
I don't believe they use that photo, but they do use, if you look, some actual photos from crime scenes in the movie, like up on their little board and things like that. And kind of just as an aside, one of the things I remember reading when I was younger and doing all this research. So is it Warren? Is it Sergeant Warren? Was that his last name? I can't remember what the sergeant's last name in real life.
Okay. Warren, his commander.
Yeah, so I know we'll get there in a minute. But so he retired after the 4th victim. Prior to his retirement, because all these crime scenes were in alleyways and they were out in the open, he puts this rule in place that nobody goes near a crime scene until he gets there. So he retires after the 4th victim. The police arrive at where the 5th victim, Mary Kelly, is and sit outside for several hours because they don't know he's resigned. And they're waiting on him to show up. And I just thought that was so wild that the chain of command on something that big is not passed down the line. I don't know that it had anything to do with how long Jack the Ripper had with her necessarily, because her body had already been found by the time police is called. But just even the elongated wait time is just something that kind of blew my mind and stuck with me all these years later.
Yeah, because I want to say, I didn't write all this down, but I remember everything you're saying from my research. I want to say she was killed in the middle of the night. Yeah. And I want to say they don't enter the room until 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, it's hours and hours that they waited because they were waiting on Warren to get there because he had told them, you don't go anywhere near the scene without me. But he was no longer employed at that time. So I will point out that Sir Charles Warren is played by Ian Richardson in the movie, and I think that's about all we need to discuss about him because I don't think there's anything else worth discussing.
And just a side note real quick before we transition, if wanting to read about it, or not read about it, reading the comic or not wanting to see the graphic pictures, I will say that if you want to get some historical accuracy on how graphic this whole crime was, go and read the actual report.
Oh, I'm about to get into some details.
Oh, you're going to get to the report? Never mind then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm about to get. That's why I gave my graphic content warning yet again. I'm about to get into some details.
Time for some bedtime stories here, Laramy. Why don't you
I am not trying to, glamorize these murders at all. I feel that these women deserve for it to be known what happened to them. I kind of feel bad that it is said in the comic. I don't think it's said in the movie, but it's said in the comic. Gull actually says about these women, they would be nothing if it wasn't for him. That he would make them remembered.
Yeah.
I don't like that is true, but it is.
Yeah.
But I think we still need to honor and respect these women. But I personally think that it is important to know what he did to her. So it is believed, after many medical examiners have looked over the notes and the pictures and all that, it is believed that she was killed by a slash to the throat, that she died. So she didn't feel anything else.
At least there's that. Yeah.
Yes. Once he started mutilating her.
Yeah, I think it was more of him to do, like, show this mutilation than it was for him to make her suffer slowly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the graphic novel, I talked about how much Alan Moore likes to write. When it gets to this and the mutilation, it is almost 30 pages of just him mutilating Mary Kelly, and there is little to no dialogue.
Just panels.
Just
panels.
Yeah. Almost 30 pages. He cuts her face off. He removes her breast and actually places one of them under her head. In the comic, he actually says, "Here's you a little pillow."
Like a pillow.
Ooh.
Yeah. I'm glad they didn't
do that
in the movie. Her abdominal cavity was emptied and laid about her. Her uterus and kidneys were also placed under her head. A large portion of her left calf and right thigh were removed. And her heart was removed. And it is believed that he put her heart in the pot over the fire and cooked it. Not sure if he ate anything, but he cooked it. In fact, reports say that when they entered the room, that fire had gotten so hot, it had actually melted the pot that was hanging above it.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's believed like he was throwing her clothes into the fire to keep the fire going. Because that was his source of light while everything was happening, was the fire.
Yeah, in the movie, this ends up being, is her name Ada in the movie, right? That this essentially happens to, instead of Mary Kelly. It's someone, and I don't know, morbid curiosity, call it, someone who has seen that photo that you're referring to, Laramy, and as well as some other crime scene photos from this particular killing spree. It is not for the faint of heart.
No.
And it is something that does stick with you, but from an educational standpoint, trying to understand, like, why, I mean, we're still trying to do this today. Why do people do these things? Like, what causes people to want to behave in this manner? And it goes back to this time period and probably even before.
And then the saying goes, with these type of people, monsters are never born, they are created.
Yeah. What happened to him that...
Which Alan Moore that's what he's kind of saying underneath all of the story. That was the whole thing, why I believe he puts the part of Adolf Hitler's parents, conceiving him. That's why they put the thing at the end.
Interesting.
With him seeing other killers throughout history and possibly even being an influence to some of them as a spirit.
That's a really good juxtaposition in a graphic novel. I really want to check this out now.
Yeah. But Mary Kelly's murder or mutilation, because again, her murder is believed to just be a throat slice. So the mutilation of her corpse by Jack the Ripper, the way it's portrayed in the comics, which, like I said, is 30 pages. Obviously, it's not that long in the movie, but the movie, without getting too graphic, because it couldn't, the movie kind of shows exactly the way it's laid out in the comic, of him just being very calm as he's doing it. Even the hallucination he has, where he is performing like he's cutting open a body in front of a
gallery.
School. A gallery of people, as if he's a teacher. Like, that was in the comic. the bright light that comes out of the window that Netley sees, that is in the comic. That there's almost some sort of almost supernatural glow that came out of there. And then, like I said, the kettle, all of that. But yeah, it is heart-wrenching to think that this happened to these women. Mary Kelly was the worst. I'll talk about some of the other ones in just a minute. But like I said, we'll move on. I'm going to hit some of this more, especially talk about a little bit of the theory behind Mary Kelly, which we'll get into, and the movie plays off of as well. Aberline's partner, Peter Godley, played by Robbie Coltrane, or Hagrid. It is, I made the joke earlier about how he would fit better to be Aberline. There is actually a belief that Alan Moore actually based the look of Aberline in the comic after Robbie Coltrane.
Interesting.
Which would make sense.
Yeah,
Robbie
I can see
Coltrane,
it.
British actor. Alan Moore, British writer.
He's got the
80s,
facial
Robbie Coltrane
for
still been. This character is not a big part in the comic. He's kind of just there a few times when Aberline's wanting to fuss about something or complain about something. So there's not really a lot to talk about here. He is a real life person. He is actually the one who arrested George Chapman, which, if you remember, who I said Aberline believed to be Jack. I didn't write down what he arrested him for, but Godley was the one who arrested George Chapman. Then we've got Netley, played by Jason Fleming in the movie, who it took me a minute.
What else is he in, Laramy?
He's Jekyll and Hyde off of
the League of
Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Okay, yeah.
I never saw that
film. It took me a minute to realize that was him.
That's a good.
Because
I
was doing the same thing.
Okay.
I'm looking at him going, I know you from
yeah.
something.
Okay.
I didn't recognize
And I
him.
finally caved. I finally caved, got onto IMDb, and I was like, oh, you're Jekyll and Hyde. Okay. So Netley more than likely was not a real person. And I will say in the comic, he is more of an accomplice than he is in the movie. So the movie really just has him being there and the one who rides Gull around. So, for instance, the Liz Stride murder, the movie really just includes kind of the moment with Liz Stride, but I'm pretty sure that in the comic he wasn't holding her as Jack killed her. And then I think this character is created from, again, more conspiracy theory, because there are eyewitnesses that saw a man shoving Liz to the ground moments before it's believed that she died. So I think that's where this character of Netley comes from. But that's all I can tell you about Netley. Y'all got any thoughts about this character?
It'd have been cooler if he turned into to Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
Well, now that I know that, I guess his character, this actor's, resume and everything more interesting now. But that, for me, not knowing that knowledge, it was just a regular character.
You could have done away with the character, and it would have changed the plot of the movie one iota.
Yeah, I kind of got that feeling.
I think he is needed if you're going to tell the Dr. Gull story, because even in the comic, even in the movie, Gull is an older man, so he has to have a way to get about. And to get about without being seen, without being noticed. So I'm not against the character. I do think the character is better in the comic than he is in the movie. I think he's a better fleshed out character in the comic.
Okay, that's fair.
But hey, when you've got 600 pages,
you flesh out a lot of stuff. Yeah,
you got plenty of time to flesh out stuff.
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the possible other victims. So first off, you've got Martha Tabram, played by Samantha Spiro in the movie. She's the first one killed, and there is debate as to whether or not she was killed by Jack the Ripper. In the movie, they do say she wasn't, because it's actually Aberline, Johnny Depp's character, who says, these two were killed the same way. Mm-hmm. I think it's after the second murder, and he said, and the first one was not. These two had this, the first one did not. So they do kind of play off that she was not. But there's still debate as to whether or not she was and it's mainly just because I think her throat was slashed. Then we've got the beginning of the canonical five. Polly Nichols in the movie, played by Annabelle Aspian. She, in the comic book, it shows her being choked, and in the movie, in both the comic book and the movie, she's choked inside of the carriage. Mm-hmm. But there is no evidence that actually supports that that's what happened in real life. There is evidence that says she may have been punched in the face to kind of subdue her. But her throat was cut left to right. She had been stabbed in her, I'm going to keep this clean, livelihood, as they actually say in the movie.
Yeah.
And she was stabbed twice in the livelihood. Her abdomen had been sliced in a way that her bowels were falling out, but there were no organs missing. So nothing was taken from her, which I believe the comic book, I can't remember if the movie, the comic book I think implies that he does remove
The movie
something.
also implies that he removed something. Yeah, something's missing. They couldn't tell what it was.
Because I couldn't remember if it was the first or the second one where Aberline asks the mortician or the whoever the guy was,
the
when he
police
asked him,
surgeon
goes,
or whatever.
what was taken.
Yeah.
Which, let me talk about him real quick. How do you have that job and you can't stand
the yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe the most unrealistic part of the whole movie for me. You're supposed to be able to stomach that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the two cops are sitting there.
Yeah, not even batting an eyelash.
Completely unfazed. Yeah. Like they've seen this, like, say,
Yeah.
just another day in, London.
Yeah.
All right, victim number 2 was Annie Chapman in the movie, played by Katrine Cartridge. Her throat as well sliced from left to right. In fact, her throat was cut so deep that there were actually knife marks on her vertebrae.
Nearly decapitated her, if I recall.
Yep. She also was disemboweled. Her stomach, so this is kind of, again, connecting it even to the Mary Kelly murder. Her stomach was actually sitting at her left shoulder. Her small intestines were partly sitting at her right shoulder. And then part of her uterus and her bladder was missing. They were not found at the scene. This is when, in the real story, it is after Annie Chapman's murder that there does start to be actual talk that this could be someone with medical training. Just because, and I think they say, I think it's actually Goal that says it in the movie, that being able to find the body part, like the uterus, being able to just find it, takes medical knowledge.
And
I think
also,
he mentions
it was very
the
clean
liver.
as well.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, people who wouldn't know what they're doing,
Then we have Liz Stride in the movie, played by Susan Lynch. She is the one who, I mean, if you have to say the one that gets off the easiest, which is horrible to say, but
It's interrupted.
she just has her throat slashed. That's it. Nothing else happens to her. A lot of people believe that is because someone was coming, and so he had to flee. What may have happened, we don't know. Again, the movie kind of implies the same thing. In the comic, there is the fact that he finds out that Mary Kelly is somewhere else in town, and so he leaves that scene to rush to get to Mary Kelly, only to later find out it wasn't Mary Kelly. That's the way the comic does it. But yeah, Liz Stride, she only gets her throat slashed, and that's what kills her. Then we have Kate Edowies, played by Leslie Sharp. Her throat also being slashed. Her intestines were pulled out, also placed over her shoulder. 2 feet were actually cut from her intestines and placed under her left arm. Her face was mutilated, so with the exception of Liz Stride, if you're following this, he gets progressively worse each time.
More and more bold. But that is what we now know as serial killers. Like, as the more comfortable they get, the more salacious the murders are.
But what's crazy is Kate Edowies, she was still warm when they found her.
Oh, God, yeah, just missed him.
Mm-hmm.
There's some people who believe that because if you read some of these, there were always crowds. Like, it drew crowds, hundreds if not thousands of people, as some of them say, especially for like the Mary Kelly, because the cops were there for so long. Some people actually believe that Jack stayed and watched.
Again, something we know that happens with killers.
Return to the scene of a crime.
Yeah.
Let's see. Other characters. I don't know if y'all want to talk about any of these. We got Ben Kidney, who was kind of the head of security for the Crown, played by Terrence Harvey. He's a made-up character. He wasn't in the comic. He's not in real life. Made up for the movie. I will say, though, he gets a nasty death in this movie.
Sorry about it.
Then we've got Dr. Farrell, played by Paul Reese, also made up for the movie as, I guess, a distraction. Like, hey, if you don't know this story, we're going to make you think it's him.
Yeah. Is that a MacGuffin?
A red herring?
No,
red herring.
That's not a MacGuffin. It's more of a red herring.
Sorry, you're correct.
Because a MacGuffin at least moves the plot.
Right, okay. That's what I never remember the difference. Red herring, thank you.
Yeah. Then you've got Queen Victoria and Prince Albert Victor, played by Liz Moscrop and Mark Dexter, which they're more important in the book than they are in the movie. So nothing probably to mention there. Another, and I will say, if you do not know anything about the comic book, seeing the Elephant Man, Joseph Merrick,
how about
is
that?
the most random scene of this movie.
Yeah. Just out of nowhere.
I will say he's played by Anthony Parker. The scene in the movie just seems completely random, completely out of place. In the comic, there's a little bit more to it. You end up finding out that Merrick and Gull actually kind of have a friendship, and Gull actually likes to sit and talk to Merrick and spend time with Merrick, and so there's a little bit more to it. The only other character to mention, and you brought her up earlier, is Ada, played by Estelle Skornick. But again, this character entirely made up for the movie, not in the comic, not in real life. But, and we'll kind of end this discussion here, she is possibly put there to feed the conspiracy that Jack's final victim was not Mary Kelly, but someone who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, which in the movie is believed to be Ada, as they reveal in the movie that Mary Kelly did flee and is now back in Ireland.
Gone to the seaside village.
Yeah, and has taken
Alice,
the supposed prince's daughter, and is raising her as her own. The comic book hints at this, but unlike the movie, Alan Moore doesn't flat out tell you that's what he's saying. When Gull's spirit is flying around that I've talked about earlier, there's a point where he's all of a sudden heading towards this little farm, and he sees a woman, and Gull even says in his own thoughts, he goes, "I don't know this person. I don't recognize this person." And then she sees him, his spirit, and she says, "You get away from here. You don't, you're not welcome here. You will have nothing to do with these children." She actually has several daughters in the comic. You do end up finding the oldest of them is named Alice, and that's the one hint you kind of get that this woman is Mary Kelly. Now, for anybody who is thinking, well, how do you not know it's Mary Kelly? I mean, obviously in the movie it's Heather Graham. You see Heather Graham, so how do you not see in the movie? I'm going to get into that a little bit more in the moving panel section as to why it's not clear whether it's Mary Kelly. But is there anything else y'all want to talk about with the characters before we jump into what will probably be the shortest moving panel section in the history of this show?
I think we hit everybody pretty good.
Yeah, you pretty much hit everybody. I meant like there were some characters I didn't understand. Well, you were mentioning before, again, they weren't referenced in the comic book, which I'm like, that makes so much more sense because I felt like they felt really out of place.
Yeah.
Especially the red herring.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and listen to an 80s Flick Flashback podcast once in a while, you could miss it. Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes, VCRs, and the video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? My name is Tim Williams. I'm the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. On each episode, I'm joined by guest co-hosts to discuss one of the many movies released in the 1980s. We share our first-time watch memories, our favorite scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories about the cast and crew along the way. New episodes are released every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an excellent episode of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. The ad is over. Go home. Go.
All right, so let's get into the moving panels. I don't have a lot here. We talked about so much as we talked through the characters and the history of this. So this is really just going to be some hit things. First off, the quote at the beginning of the movie about how he gave birth to the 20th century, which he says in the movie. Yeah, that's it. This is not a real quote. There's no evidence that Jack the Ripper ever said that.
Nope.
So it made no sense why you would put it at the beginning of this movie as if it was a real
Mostly because the quote makes no sense in general, as far as what he's doing, giving birth to the 20th century. So, yeah,
and who says
sense.
that too? Like,
No.
that doesn't make any sense for his character. I meant, like, I can't really delve into the mind of Jack the Ripper, but just doesn't make sense.
Did this movie give birth to 20th Century Fox? Is that what he was referring to? Because other than that, it makes no sense whatsoever.
All right, so this is probably going to be the depth of my discussion here. And I'm going to give my thoughts.
The Johnny depth of this conversation?
Oh,
I can't help it, Laramy. Okay, sorry.
Okay. I know we're trying to keep a little bit
I'm trying to get some lighthearted in here.
Yes.
It's a heavy episode.
So with that being said, let me talk about what I think the theme of this story is.
Sweet.
Again, I'm talking more of the comic than I am the movie. So what is Moore trying to say in this story? I did not pick up on this as I read it. It wasn't until I started doing a little bit of research. And I'm going to be perfectly honest. After thinking about this a little bit more, part of me wants to actually read it again to see how much of this I can pick up for myself. But I actually think he is trying to tell something about the patriarchy. You know, yes, Queen Victoria is the one who sends Gull out. But Gull is ultimately the one with the power. And the Masons, the Freemasons, are the ones with the power. Every time we see Queen Victoria, she is sitting in a dark room, doing absolutely nothing. The police, of course, being connected, and all of these men are running the show. And that's, again, what Aberline eventually discovers, and he doesn't like it. And the comic does a great job with it. I hate that part's not really in the movie, of Aberline kind of realizing the conspiracy and that he's just being a pawn in this. I will say that Campbell, and this is what I was mentioning earlier when I talked about Mary Kelly. I think Campbell, I don't know if it was from Moore telling him to do this, but I feel he intentionally drew all of the women to look almost exactly the same.
Yeah, it could be every woman kind of thing. Yeah.
It is very difficult sometimes to figure out what character might be on the panel, on the page. And I think that's, again, why at the end, when it shows this woman talking to the spirit of Gull, it's never said it's Mary Kelly. And again, you can't actually identify it to be Mary Kelly because all these women were drawn in the comic to look very similar, which I think was done intentionally, not only to continue this theme of the patriarchy, but also this is the way those women were perceived by Gull, that they were just random women. He cared nothing about them. And the same thing, again, like I said, with the patriarchy. They were just perceived as just, I mean, you could almost say faceless women.
Disposable. There
you go. Disposable.
Yeah, again, classism, all that, where they were in the slums, didn't really care about them.
Yep.
I will say, though, that the more I thought about it, I realized that Alan Moore, though, the same way I've talked about in this episode, Alan Moore respected these women and honored these women by making them the main characters of this story. Yes, you have Aberline. Yes, you have Gull. And yes, there's a lot to do with Aberline and Gull. And there's other little stories that go off. But when the women are featured, they are the story. They are more than just the victims. Again, like I said earlier, Gull may have been right that he would be the one to make them famous and that no one would remember them without their connection. But Moore made sure that you knew that these were women that had lives, that had struggles, had good times, had bad times, It is, of course, in the comic and then in the movie that they connect all of these women by actually making them friends. There's no evidence that any of these victims knew each other in the real world. So even doing that and showing this, unity among these women, I think just made them so much more important. It gave them more of a personality than just being the 5 victims of Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, he does a good job in the comic, especially of humanizing them, making them more than just people on paper, and paying respect to them in a way that showcases them, as you said, women who had lives, had hopes, dreams, struggles, good times, bad times. And I hate that as Gull says, quote unquote, the only reason they're known or famous is because of this. But I think the movie and the comic does also do a good job of showing these women as being the heroes of their own story in so much as they can be, doing what they can to get by, not depending on a man for their purposes of survival. So I do think they do a great job of covering that. I'd agree with you wholeheartedly on that, Laramy.
So do y'all have any, James, I know you haven't read the comics, so you really just have the movie to go off of.
No, I was going to have to agree with both of you. I meant, I guess from reading, reading from just the letters to the research of stuff, that they really do make them out to be more than just the victims. Yes, they are the result of Jack the Ripper, but they're more than that. They had a life. This was their way of making money. Yes, they were prostitutes, but they weren't supposed to be looked down upon. And again, I go back to this changed the whole entire outlook on how people live in the slums and in poverty. It changed it, I feel like, forever.
Yeah, but again, I like to go back and reread some of it to see. I do know that Alan Moore is very political in a lot of what he does. I mean, you go to Watchmen. I mean, dear Lord.
Good Lord, yeah.
Very bleak. Very political.
V for Vendetta, which I am actually in the middle of reading because Blake and I will be doing that episode in a couple of weeks. So I do think this is Alan Moore speaking against the patriarchy in his own way through the story of Jack the Ripper. And that's where I'm going to leave that. Completely going a different direction. Let me ask what your thoughts were on the relationship between Aberline and Kelly.
Stale as the bread in my pantry right now. It was little to no chemistry, at least not in the movie. If we're talking about the actual movie here.
So yeah, we'll talk about the movie first.
Yeah,
so obviously
it's not good.
And then there's that really awkward moment where they just start kissing each other, and the policeman comes and breaks them up.
Not believable.
Yeah.
It's
your thoughts, James?
Same. The whole chemistry. It just didn't feel. It felt too forced. It's like they want to put some kind of let's put romance in this crime drama because we feel like that's just such a cliche, and it's like you don't have to do this because it's not about them. Again, it's like this seems so out of place.
So to let you know, James and Blake, if you didn't remember this, so in the comic, they do have a relationship, but it's a relationship of friendliness.
Yeah, I was gonna say it wasn't. I didn't think it.
They
was
also don't know who each other are in the comic.
Romantic.
In the comic, Aberline goes into the bar, 10 Bells, and he speaks with Mary Kelly, but Mary Kelly gives him a fake name. He also, I think he still uses the name Fred, but he tells her he does some other line of work and whatnot. And they end up just talking, and he gets information from her, but they enjoy each other's company. She enjoys that there's a man who is willing to talk to her
just
without
wants to
wanting
chat with her. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they do have that. Now, I will say that towards the end of the comic, Aberline does consider a physical encounter with Mary, but it never happens. Mary does kiss him, I think, a couple of times, but it's just he loans her some money, and she's just so happy she kisses him and then goes away. So there's no really physical relationship between them, and it's just once Aberline gets so wrapped up in everything that he just wants an escape, and he does consider it in the comics, but nothing ever happens. Also, he's married in the comic. There is no dead wife. He's actually on his well, there might be a dead wife because this is his second
marriage.
but he's married in the comic. Like you see him go home to his wife,
And so
he's still with his wife when he retires.
to push forward even further on this a little bit, I'm more than a little frustrated at the ending of the movie. His concern about being followed to the Irish countryside seems a little baffling to me, as how would anyone know where he's going if he just up and leaves in the middle of the night one night?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
goes,
if Mary Kelly was able to do
yeah,
it,
and
why
goes to
couldn't
Ireland. I just felt like, hey, if you wanted to be with her, man, ladies, if he wants to, he will. Okay, don't forget that.
All right, last topic, and then we'll have to wrap this one up. And that is going back to William Gull being Jack. Now, we've talked about it a little bit, but I do want to throw in the whodunit aspect that the comic and the movie are very different on. So, the comic lets you know that William Gull is Jack the Ripper from the beginning. There is no question of who is Jack the Ripper. The movie, of course, does the whodunit. Who is Jack the Ripper? What do you think is better storytelling, knowing or not knowing?
I don't want to speak for James, but he's a horror aficionado. It's probably better just go and tell me up front, since it is so painfully obvious. If you have never read the comic, that William Gull, something is fishy, like he is clearly either helping this or is Jack the Ripper himself. The movie is not good storytelling, in my opinion, as far as that goes. I would prefer just to have it up front, and then maybe even have some scenes from Jack's perspective, knowing it is William Gull. Yeah, I didn't buy it that in the movie. I wish it wouldn't have been Bilbo Baggins again there killing all these people, because it just doesn't seem believable in the first place. But the fact that the jig is up from the beginning anyways in the movie.
I have to agree. I have to disagree. I'm more of I like being revealed at the end, because to me, it does more. Fear of the unknown is such a primal thing for people that it's just something that I resonate with more, because it makes you guess all this stuff. But there is a way to do it correctly, and I feel like in this film it really wasn't, or I guess like how they were trying to go about it. Because I mean, let's do Psycho for an instance, like just quickly. We don't know that it's Norman Bates, but we keep thinking that it's his mother, and then all of a sudden it's like, holy crap, this is mind-blowing, but also at the same time it's very disturbing, and you weren't expecting it. So when you have reveals like that in these type of storytelling, I feel like that's where it works. And then, but sometimes if it's like an Agatha Christie type thing, where it's just like, oh well, that's so it's not, it doesn't really add much to the imagination.
Well said.
Yeah, I'm in the same vein of, I do like the whodunit, like trying to figure out who you're saying is the killer. I think it's harder to do with a real true story like this, because if you know anything, usually you can figure it out already. I'm not going to disagree that it's obvious that it's William Gull, but at the same time, think about who we are. I mean, Blake, you had already read the comic before you saw the movie. I saw the movie first, but me and James are two guys that analyze and break down movies all the time. So you've got, it seems obvious to us.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was to everybody.
Yeah, maybe not to the quote-unquote general audience, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have the benefit of modern-day movies where, do they have an Apple phone or not? That's how...
Can't be the bad guy. If you...
Yeah.
Or think of like...
Knives Out.
Or think of like the
that's what you got to pay attention to.
Or like Hannibal from the Hannibal series. We know who it is right away from the series, but it's just fun to watch him. So it's a balance.
Yeah. And it's the storytelling, and I think that even knowing with the comic and Alan Moore revealing it right off the bat, it adds this whole other level to it. But I still am one who says I don't think I know it's been disproven by many, but even looking at it, I don't know how you could ever believe that William Gull was Jack the Ripper. There's his age. Yes, there's belief that he was, kind of going insane because of his strokes and all that, so his mental capacity wasn't great. But that still doesn't make a lot of sense to what Jack did. The chalk message, which I didn't say, I do have it here. The message said, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Huh?
The triple negative there, the rare.
Yeah. And then they try to do this crazy stuff in the movie where they try to make the way he wrote Jews,
Right.
spelled Jews,
Be something to do with
connected to the
Freemasons.
Freemason stuff. And anyway, and then like you said earlier, the whole his eyes turning black. It's just, what are you doing?
Too much
Like,
there. Too many things.
You're taking what is a real horrific crime in human history, and you have attached a clairvoyant psychic detective and a possibly demon-possessed killer, and you've made it this supernatural-ish movie. And
Could have just made it a Constantine film and been done with it.
yeah.
I guess they kind of want him to be ethereal. I think that's what I'm going to say, like ethereal with him.
Which again, you read the comic, that last chapter with him being the spirit, that'll make a little bit
Okay.
more sense. But I think that gets into it. Bag it, stack it, or trade it. Let's see. Let's have James take it first. Now, I actually want y'all to do something a little different, since we've talked so much about the comic, and I know, James, you haven't read the comic, but I want to get your thoughts on what you think about the comic, and then your final decision about the movie.
Okay. I'll start with the comic just because from what you've told me, and when I first saw it, like I said, I never did get the chance to read it, but when my friend showed it to me and I saw how thick that thing was, I was like, that is ridiculous. How can something this be long? But from what you guys have told me, there's a reason why Alan Moore does that. It's his storytelling. It's the panels. It's all of that. So if I was to, like, I guess, like, if you meant, like, bag it, stack it, or sell it, I would have to, for the comic, I'd bag it. I would definitely.
What about the movie?
Okay, this is just me, just because I watched 2 Jack the Ripper films just because I was curious. But with this one specifically, I would have to stack it. Nothing amazing. Some problems with, like, some of the pacing. The romance is what really killed me in that film with Johnny Depp. I was like, it's really killing the vibe. So I'd have to say I'd stack it.
And the other Jack the Ripper movie you watched was the one you mentioned that came out in the 60s?
Yeah, 1959. To be honest,
Or 50.
I'd have to say I would bag it.
Oh, okay. Definitely.
It's early.
So you would bag From Hell?
Yeah.
Okay.
Check that out.
All right. So Blake, how about you? Start with the comic.
So the comic, again, is I haven't reread it, but I have, like, flipped through it and, the bookstore, flip through it on my shelf every now and then. The artwork, I love Eddie Campbell's artwork is really good in my opinion as far as black and white artwork go. The story itself, I am a sucker for some, like, talking about backstories and developing characters and having these little side tales, maybe not Hitler's conception, but other than that, I enjoy those things. I like the storytelling aspect. So I'm certainly bagging the comic. It is as a classic as it can be with the story that it's telling. The movie, the Johnny Depp film, I would probably trade it for actual footage, documentation, or I'm not footage, but documentaries, photos, reports. I would much rather read or view those things than the movie again.
Have you seen any other movies about Jack the Ripper?
I've seen a couple of documentaries, but no other, like, feature films. I will be going to Tubi on James' recommendation and checking out this other one.
I do know there's another one from, it's either the 70s or the 80s with Michael Caine. I think Michael Caine plays Aberline. So the comic for me is a bag it, which I am surprised I say that because I was talking with Blake as I was reading through it. It is a chore to get through the first 5-6 chapters.
It's tough. You have to love some exposition in order to.
When Blake's talking about the backstories and all the, even what you were talking about, James, of all the stuff that Moore was doing to build his story. I mean, it's a chore to get through the first 5-6 chapters. Once, though, once the things start to get going, it is captivating. But as I said at the beginning, you do have to stop from time to time. But yeah, I would bag it. It would have to be a very large bag.
Duffel bag.
Yeah, again, 600-page comic. As for the movie, it's funny. We've covered the spectrum. I'm gonna say stack it.
Okay.
The movie is not as good as the comic. The movie is not good, but it's also not bad, which is why I put it in the stack it. I always say, did I at least enjoy myself while I watched it? And as I said earlier, yes, I did. I didn't think I would because what I remembered watching back in 01 or 02 wasn't. But watching it this time, I'm watching it going, hey, it's not good, but again, the visuals, the performances aren't
It's
bad.
got some interesting stuff. Agreed.
Yeah. But at the same time, for a movie that's supposed to be about Jack the Ripper, there is not enough Jack the Ripper in this movie.
Thank you. There it is. There it is.
There's more of Aberline. There's more of Mary Kelly. There's not enough Jack the Ripper. I will say, funny enough, I also went to another Jack the Ripper movie after I watched From Hell, but that was Time After Time, which if you are not familiar with, is the movie in which you find out that Jack the Ripper is a friend of H.G. Wells. And once he is discovered, he steals H.G. Wells' time machine to go into the future, and then H.G. Wells has to travel into the future to stop him.
Is this a buddy comedy movie? Road trip film?
It's not a comedy. No. But
when was this movie made?
Yeah. This was late 70s, early
Time After
80s.
Time. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and it's called Time. They even updated it, made it into a television series just a few years ago on ABC. But I don't think it got canceled like mid-season.
Okay.
I don't think. But yeah, it's Malcolm McDowell plays H.G. Wells.
Perfect.
Yeah.
David Warren plays Jack the Ripper. And then Mary Steenburgen is the love interest to H.G. Wells. So yeah, there you go. Time After Time for a completely different look at Jack the Ripper. All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap that up. Again, a little bit longer of an episode, but there was so much to talk about here. This is our Halloween episode. Here, our full movie review Halloween episode here a week before Halloween. Either one of you, since both of you are horror movie fans and all that, y'all got any like Halloween traditions or things that you like to do on Halloween?
Yeah, I actually have a newer one. So by the time my wife listens to this, we'll have celebrated our 1-year anniversary. So shout out to my wife.
Congrats.
Happy 1 year. So now we got married on the 29th of October. So now for Halloween, we go trick-or-treating with some of our friends, their kids. And I take photos, just do some family photos for them while we're out trick-or-treating. It's fun to just spend some time with friends around any holiday. And then she is not a horror movie fan, does not watch horror movies, does not watch TV shows that are horror.
What is it with us
Yeah,
marrying
I don't
people
know.
who don't like
I
horror
don't know.
movies?
So I sit around and I rewatch Haunting of Hill House every Halloween on Netflix now. And then I just finished Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix. So any horror movie or TV show I can get my hands on is my Halloween tradition. Like that's what I do all month long.
Well,
All right, James?
what I've done usually in the past, what I did from since I was like 16, I always watched Halloween on Halloween night. I know, so creative.
Hey,
But
can't beat the classics, man.
Tradition.
yeah, but this time I've decided to take a different route. I tried it last year, but I was not in a good place. But this year I'm going to do it again. I am going to do a random wheel of various horror films that are on there, and I'm just going to let it spin. Wherever it lands, I'm going to find the horror film and I'm going to watch it. So if I end up watching Killer Clowns, I'm going to watch Killer Clowns. If I
Jason in space again.
Jason takes
X.
Manhattan, I'm watching it. Luckily, I have a girlfriend who loves these films. So
Nice. It's just such a fun holiday. It's a fun holiday.
So James, why don't you tell everybody about your little series you also do?
Oh, sure. Yes. Again, this was something that I started last year. It's called Movies from the Mausoleum. And I usually pick films that are almost hidden away in a mausoleum type thing that you haven't heard of, that have been like, underrated, and I usually talk about them live. I tried it last year, again, wasn't a good place, but this year I've been sticking with it, and I've been picking some really good ones. A few traditional ones. I did pick Friday the 13th, because why not pick Friday the 13th when it's in the month of October? It's just
right.
And there was a Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
It's sacrilegious to not talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm on TikTok. I'll talk about my TikTok. It's called Dead Tom is Dead. That's my TikTok. That's where I post all of my clips for my horror podcast, some jump scares. But I also will be putting my movies from the mausoleum there. So if you have trouble trying to find a horror film during this time of the month, or if you're, wanting to introduce family or girlfriends and wives to horror films, but you don't know what to pick, I got you. There are some that you can pick that are very subtle and very easy, but still have that creepy horror vibe.
Nice.
Of course, the great thing about a lot of these, as you call them, mausoleum movies, is most of them are on Tubi. So
You're welcome.
Shout out Tubi.
Pretty easy to. Yeah. That's the great thing about Tubi. It's those movies no one's ever heard of. But we're going to go ahead and wrap things up today. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining me. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hopefully, we didn't bore you too much. Hopefully, we gave you maybe some interesting stuff here on Halloween to talk about the infamous Jack the Ripper. And hey, look, go out and read the comic. If you are a comic reader, if you especially love Alan Moore, but you've never read From Hell, read it. Again, a little struggle to get through the beginning of it, but then you'll be good. But we'll end things now. Rate and review the show. Follow James with his TikTok at Dead Tom, as well as the podcast interview with a horror virgin. And of course, you can always keep up with Blake here on Moving Panels, because there's no way to really promote his photography business through the podcast.
You got to see it to believe it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody, for today. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.